Chapter 14. A Strange Encounter. It was several hours of walking before either of the two actually said anything. Dirk was the first to break the silence. Yeah, well, we really should set up camp for the night. I'll get the fire going. And with that, Dirk started collecting firewood from a nearby brush, and Val proceeded to set up the blankets and pillows right on the side of the road. The full moon was out, and the crickets could be heard chirping in the cool night air. The fire was starting to go out, and Val noticed it. So, he reached for a piece of wood to put on the fire when he became aware of a shadowy figure on the other side of the road. A cloaked man stood in the shadows, leaning against a tall tree. Val froze up with a look of shock on his face. The shadowy figure casually walked into the firelight. As the light of the fire slowly illuminated the figure, Val could see that it was the same cloaked man from back in the pub. He was still wearing that same dark purple cloak, and he looked like he was about 80 years old. "Hello again," the old foreigner said with a raspy voice that sounded like he'd been smoking for a great many years. Val hadn't noticed that Dirk was now up as well. "Who are you, and why are you following us?" Dirk asked as he readied his bow, arrow notched into place. "You can call me Morden." He sat down near the fire across from them and pulled out his old pipe and a small pouch. Removing some weed from the bag, he placed it into the end of his pipe. He pulled out an extended mechanical lighter and puffed. Smoke rose into the air around him as he put the lighter back into one of his inside pockets. "And I'm following you because I choose to. There is something about the two of you that fascinates me. I have a power that lets me sense when something is amiss or special about someone. I get that same feeling, you could call it a type of intuition, about the two of you, Valentine and Dirk Carrot, warriors of the Anything Goes school of martial arts." Val and Dirk both looked at each other in astonishment. "How do you know who we are?" they both asked. Dirk lowered his weapon, giving the stranger some room for comfort. Morin puffed on his pipe, blew 3 smoke rings at them, and grinned broadly. "Well, I am a wizard," he said. "I feel that there is a great purpose for you too. You have a destiny to fulfill that will end up saving many lives." He paused and puffed on his pipe, a destiny that the two of you both share and cannot ignore. "Huh." Dirk laughed. "A destiny, you say? Kinda weird. The two of us with some kind of grand calling. I mean, we don't really do anything other than cause mischief and escape perilous situations." Dirk paused for a moment, like that time when Val and I had to escape that horrible castle. Nothing but trouble that was, and no good could have come from what happened there. "Oh, I just hate the thought of that place." "Yeah, let's never ever go back there, ever," Val said as he tossed a log onto the flames. The wizard took a long and deep breath, drew the smoke and released it over the fire. The smoke stopped and started to form a picture of a great battle. The battle was strewn out along the edge of a mountainside, and the battle was a good distance away. On the edge of a cliff stood 2 soldiers. One was a big muscular guy, and the other wasn't so much, more of an average stature. The 2 figures were overlooking the battle, appearing to be commanding one of the armies that waged war down below. Eventually the image got clear enough to see their faces. And it was none other than Val and Dirk themselves. Then, the smoky image faded into the air, disappearing as if it never had existed at all. Val and Dirk sat there in silence and shock as the wizard rose to his feet. "Well, I should take my leave of you. I hope you take what I had to show you to heart, until we meet again." With that, he gave a nod to the two and walked off into the darkness, disappearing down the road in the direction that they had been heading. "My head hurts, I'm going to sleep now," Val said, breaking the silence. Dirk only sat there barely looking at Val, and then gazed down the long road where the old man had made his way. The following morning the sun shone through the trees, and the birds chirped their morning melodies. The fire was smoldering and crackling, small streams of smoke wafted into the vast open sky. Dirk got up and let out a long, immense yawn, followed by several intense stretches. Noticing that Val was still asleep and snoring, he gave his partner a swift kick in the ribs. "No, Dirk. Don't eat me," Val yelled, bolting upright. There was a short pause as the pain from the kick crept out from behind his tired eyes. "Hey, what did you do that for?" Val struggled between rubbing the now sore ribs or his tired, complaining eyes. "Get yourself up," You'll have time to be lazy when you're dead, Dirk retorted. Val stretched as he got to his feet, running his hands through his short dark hair. Hair that was now just long enough to lie on his head the way he liked it, not the way Dirk still remained. Dirk wasn't as fortunate. His hair was still a little on the short side, standing straight and true. The blonde spikes made him look just as mean as he did when he was bald weeks before. Ah, gee Dirk, it's still early. Let me sleep for a couple more hours, won't you? Dirk only shook his head and pointed north. We have not more than a 2-day journey ahead of us, and I'd like to get as much distance from this crazy place as fast as we can. The sooner we arrive, the better. Several uneventful, boring days later, they made their way further out, and they encountered more and more obstacles as they traveled. Val was beginning to protest, with questions such as, "Are we there yet?" and "How much further?" Yet, every time Val posed a question, Dirk would insist that they were almost there, just a bit further to go. Like clockwork, every time Dirk would insist, they would come to even tougher terrain to traverse. They were now following a stream and had to start climbing rock faces and steep hills. They followed the water going against the flow, heading upstream as it connected to a river that was feeding it. The river increased in intensity at a drastic rate, getting crazier and steepier as they went on, with waterfalls and crazy torrents. It went on and on like this for an additional 2 days until Val started to notice ruins of old. But more than that, there seemed to be a consistent theme emerging as they now followed the winding river. Every time they scaled a waterfall, at the top there were pillars that seemed to jut out of the water in a random placement. Each of the pillars looked like they once had carvings all around the stone, stretching the whole span, now wiped away by time and the elements of nature. Eventually, they came across giant stone pillars, pillars that overshadowed the ones they passed earlier, pillars that were lined up on either side of the river. One after another, they were lined up in a sort of perfect placement. Their spacing was precise and clearly deliberate, but it wasn't necessarily in a straight line. They were following the river. Wherever the river would turn, the pillars would follow. Val and Dirk continued walking up the hill alongside the pillars. Then the land started to level off and the river calmed down. The pillars now seemed to have stopped, and the water looked like it was starting to change in color as they came to a wall of trees that stretched to the right and left as far as the eye could see. The trees were placed in an unnatural pattern of row after row, offset to thicken the density of the trees. The trees were straight and true, each one was about 7 feet thick in diameter, and they reached far into the sky. Dirk declared that the trees were 200 feet tall, or so he figured. All equal in height and size. The branches reached out towards each of the surrounding trees, solidifying the appearance of the wall, complete with low-lying branches that seemed to cling to the grass below. Navigating the dense brush seemed a feat in itself, so a game was made of it. Flipping and rotating their bodies, the two slid through the narrow gaps in the trees, each trying to outdo the other as they moved gracefully through the wall. There were moments when Val would move at such speed that Dirk had to reposition himself to watch the smaller framed human avoid the long branches as he moved. Whereas for Dirk, his large body required more calculated maneuvers to miss impacting with the larger of branches that intertwined with smaller ones. In the end, it took an hour, a full and long hour that left them both exhausted, out of breath, and tired. The exercise would have deterred even the adept of adventurers, but not Val and Dirk. They had been excessively stubborn and determined. Heck, if it weren't for all the taunting and mocking of each other, neither one would have bothered to persist onward. Now through the wall, they resumed following the river, the color more evident than before. The water shimmered with a chromatic sheen, the colors almost mesmerizing, seeming to emanate off the surface and into the air. A beautiful flowing river unlike anything either of them had ever seen before. Val was about to speak when he was nudged on his shoulder unexpectedly. Taking his eyes away from the water, he looked at Dirk, whose arm was outstretched and pointing to where the river turned into a lake, towards a large collection of those same pillars from before. This time, they were densely scattered throughout the small lake, all in different places, only a couple feet apart from each other, almost as if they had been born in the center of the lake, spreading on outwards within the confines of the shore. "There it is, Val," Dirk spoke in venerated awe, the ancient training field of Lake Terrellance. As they got closer, the details on the pillars got clearer and more elaborate. These carvings seemed to depict ancient battles against beasts, which neither of them could name, and others that they could. The creatures were often depicted towards the latter half of the pillars, their gaping maw reaching skyward, as if it were trying to consume whatever was once resting on top. Val stopped and began rummaging through the coin purse that had been hanging around his neck. Dirk's jaw dropped in disbelief. Seriously? Your whole arm? You can fit your whole arm in there. The other had his arm entirely consumed by the petite coin purse. He looked to be digging away, searching for something that was hidden within it. Val paused and stared back at his brother. What was his only reply? Dirk shook his head, laughing to himself as Val pulled his arm out of the coin pouch and withdrew a black tunic with silver embroidery. Then his hand darted back in and emerged shortly with the matching pants, also black in color. You're not going. Dirk couldn't finish his sentence as Val was quick to drop his pants. 10 seconds later it was all over, the change of clothes made. Val stuffed the rest of his gear back into the pouch. You could at least give me time to look away. Dirk protested. Bah, I kept my civvies on. What are you complaining about? Val smirked back.